Thinking about it, I'm a high. To get away from all the cameras. I'm over it, don't wanna fantasize.
Just got this hot jacket, racing jacket from our boy Chris at Leverage. I really do live my life a quarter mile at a time. Leverage Motorsports. I don't know if you guys know Chris. Chris is a super successful guy in the fashion industry. He has a showroom now, a bunch of brands. He also has an insane car collection, Ferraris and Lambos and God knows what else. So he got this ridiculous jacket. All these patches, Mercedes, Ferraris. Hopefully got an Aston Martin one on this thing for me. This is dope. I'm curious now what this business is, Chris. Holler at me. Thanks for all the gear. Let's see you at Agenda.
So fresh, but I guess how I wanna. Made a name, made my way to California. Getting paid and I get it how I wanna.
So I get hit up all the time about how do you become a designer, how do you start your own fashion brand, and I didn't get trained formally in design or production or anything for that matter. I kind of learned it the hard way with me and my partner. And so I don't want to be the person to tell people how to become a designer or become a creative director. So introduce you to Cinque. Cinque is a creative director and head designer and our real creative force at Young and Reckless, and really in charge of not only the fashion part of our business, but the marketing and all that great stuff. Super talented, one of the most kind of creative and talented people that I've ever worked with. So I wanted him to kind of give you background on like what does it take to actually be a real designer in the fashion business. So Cinque, can you give us a little background on like where did you go after high school, or like how did you get into it?
I kind of took the normal channels, went to school,
Yeah.
studied fashion design, did the internships.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to FIT in New York.
Got it. And
Yeah.
that is a 4-year college?
Yeah, you can do a 4-year, 2-year program, everything from fashion to graphic design, advertising design.
And what was your like major there?
Menswear.
Menswear. So
Yeah.
during those 4 years, you focus on the menswear business.
100%.
So everything from like fabrics to like what's like the background they give you?
Well, honestly, at school, there really is just a focus on construction, which is how do you build garments as if you were a pattern maker or a sewer. So it gives you the building blocks that you need to understand how, you know, garments are actually made.
So let's just say you already graduated college or you can't afford to go to FIT. How do you learn that stuff? Because I see a lot of Instagram designers that are just buying blanks, maybe
Yeah.
throw a wash, screen printing,
Yeah.
and everyone's like, I want to do cut and sew, but like, we all know that is not an easy thing to do. So like, how does someone learn?
On the fly, I think you can take a garment apart, right? If you don't know pattern making, you get a seam ripper, which is basically a tool that allows you to go in and take threads apart. And you can learn basically how a garment is constructed by looking at the pattern pieces. It's like a puzzle. So you'll see one piece of fabric that becomes the neckband, one piece of fabric that becomes the sleeve. You'll look at the different shapes and you can kind of get the gist of how something comes about.
Yeah. What about fabrics? Like, where do you learn about fabrics? I mean, I learned everything about manufacturing and design from being on factory floors.
Right.
That's how I learned about fabric. I would sit in meetings and they'd be like, oh, this is blah, 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 poly cotton. And I just nodded my head. And then eventually I went back to the hotel room and like, oh shit, okay,
Yeah.
this is what's going on. But it would have been helpful to know that stuff going in advance.
Absolutely. And I think Google is still like a huge tool. You know,
Yeah.
Google, YouTube. The biggest thing that I think most people don't know is the difference between a knit and a woven, right?
Yeah.
You say that and it's like, you know, question marks.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
So what I'm wearing, like a classic t-shirt or joggers, these snap-off pants, they're all knit fabrics. Wovens would be your classic button-down shirt, a pair of slacks, khakis, denim. So that's a key thing to know, so that you at least seem like you know a little bit about what's going on.
And then what about like in terms of, because I'm assuming a lot of the folks here are not learning design the traditional way, which is like in a sewing room, making patterns. Like it's all digital now.
Yeah.
So like, where do you start? What's like the first program you should learn?
Adobe Illustrator, for sure.
Does that go for graphic design as well as catting up garments?
For the most part. If you're going to do designs that are more cartoony, for lack of a better description, then Illustrator is going to be your go-to tool. And then in terms of just an all-purpose program that you can put layouts, presentations together, do a little bit of graphics, do your CADs, which are garment drawings, that would be your go-to program to learn.
And Illustrator, you can kind of learn, like the Learning Center, like, there's tons of places where you can go and learn Illustrator now, right?
There's a really good book, and I'll give you the info so we can put it, a link somewhere. But I would say take this book and go through it step by step. It's called... Kevin Tallon, Tallon, and it's something like creative design with Illustrator.
Got it.
And basically, I took this book and I went through it page to page before I actually took my first Illustrator class, and I had to jump on everyone. It teaches you all the basics from creating or tracing a garment flat from a photo to creating pattern fills and all the sort of weird little components of Illustrator that most people don't actually use, how you can use them to create garment sketches.
And then in terms of like the pathway to get to like where you're at,
right?
Where does someone start? Like, what's a good first internship job? Like, where did you start? I know where you start, but just to explain to them.
Well, I interned at a company called John Varvatos to start, and that's sort of high-end American, and almost like an Amiri, Amiri's dad kind of vibe. Yeah.
But you just interned in the design department?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So under like the head of design, a category, or what was it?
Right. I was under Star USA, which was the takedown product, and I was under knits and sweaters.
Got it. And then what's the next step from there?
I'd say do a couple of internships. One thing about John Varvatos was that John was very specific about the way he wanted things done. So everything had to be written on black paper. You can't, draw black or blue ink on black paper. So you had to write everything in a silver Jelly Roll pen. And if one line was off or you had to cross it out or make a mistake, you'd have to trash it.
Yeah.
And then, do it again.
So are kids still getting trained like that? Because like you obviously are very meticulous and like have a very distinct design kind of background, very different than people in LA.
Right.
Like, I don't feel like they're getting that rigorous type of discipline or training today.
Yeah.
I mean, like, how are you training our staff?
It's tough. I mean, I think you take a little bit of that. Like, I'm not that pedantic. Like, John Varvatos was a crazy experience, and then I interned at Macy's, which was the polar opposite, because you've got, a company pumping out millions of SKUs at any given point.
You don't have time to sit and play those games. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you learn how to put together a collection. It's really about getting out there and taking different things from each experience and crafting your own sort of strategy. Because every creative director is different in terms of what they like to do, merchandising wise, design wise, all of that good stuff. I've always been very practical. So we want to create really cool things, but we want to create things that actually sell.
Yeah.
So understanding your customer is super, super important, and being able to design for them rather than yourself in a corporate setting is going to be the key to success. If you're creating your own line, it's totally up to you. Do what you want to do, but make sure you identify a void in the marketplace, so you're not just creating something that a million people have done and maybe have failed at.
And then what about, like, where do you draw inspiration from? Because in the old days, people traveled, they went shopping. We used to do that too, and we'd blow $100K and just like stupid samples all over. We don't do that anymore. So how do you draw inspiration in today's world?
I say it's all about looking at people on the street.
Yeah.
And for me and young men's, I really want to see what the kids are wearing.
Yeah.
You know, on the street, on the subway in New York City, just kind of people watching, that is to me the key.
Yeah.
And of course, you want to look at your, you know, style.com and check out the shows.
Yeah.
But I think you kind of want to draw the line and take a peek at things, but don't get too immersed because you don't want to be too duplicative.
Yeah.
So, you know, a little smattering here and there, and really just believe in your gut and your instincts in terms of, you know, where you see the trends going.
So a lot of it is being like self-aware, because most designers, like you said, design for themselves, and so many brands fail.
Right.
Because it's very hard. I used to, my example of how I knew we were making good or bad product was I would walk into Macy's when we were selling them, and I'd say, who the fuck is buying 5'4"? We're sitting next to Ralph Lauren and Tommy and Nautica.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even buy it.
Yeah.
And then that made us go back to the drawing board and like, we need to really find where we fit in the market. Obviously on the internet, you control your story, your marketing. You can catch fire for many number of reasons, but like today, I just feel like so many people will come to me and say, just look at my graphic t-shirt brand. And I'm like, okay, is Kanye wearing it?
Right.
Otherwise,
right.
I don't see why anyone would buy this stuff.
Right.
And that's the harsh reality that I feel like, you know, and do you think that's a reason because you went to school? You really, like, do your peers, all your peers self-aware like that? Or is that just more of a rare trait still?
I think there are some people that are super self-aware, and there's some that aren't, and their paths are different. I have friends that started lines out of school. My thing was, hey, I need a job, I need to make money.
Yeah.
So I wanted to succeed within some sort of structure to gain as much knowledge as I possibly could.
Yeah.
You know, there are kids who went to school with me who were great artists, right? So a lot of people sometimes feel like, oh man, I can't draw, I can't sketch. But you don't really have to. If you have an eye, you can always get someone to execute it. I mean, that's always like the icing on the cake if you can do a sketch. But in terms of being an all-around person that thinks big picture, it's really about identifying the why, right? You know, you start a clothing line. Why do we need this t-shirt? Why are these pants relevant?
Yeah. Why
are people going to wear it?
Yeah. And I think the other thing that we didn't touch on is you are involved in production, sales, and marketing. Right. Is that like the modern creative director, or like are there still people in La La Land just like painting and fucking actually just being creative all day? Because I can't operate my business hiring people like that. If you're not aware of costing, you're not aware of opportunity, you're not aware of the marketing, you're not aware of how to make the product from a production standpoint, it's kind of not the package that I would hire today.
Right. To give you context, about 8-9 years ago when I interned at Macy's, there was a color department, right? So they had a whole team that would look at little swatches to make sure that the red matched the red standard. That doesn't exist anymore. Why? Because the business just isn't what it used to be. You've got to consolidate.
Yeah.
You got to be multi-talented and think at things from different perspectives. Yeah. And I think that especially in a small business versus a big business, you do have to take on more responsibility. That is a function of what you do, what we do here. So that's really important to educate yourself to know Excel, not just Illustrator, because you should be able to say, okay, this costs $14. We need to sell it to X for Y. How much money are we really making if we sell 500 pieces? So having that skill set in your back pocket as a creative director is just going to make you that much more valuable to the company that you work for, and even to your own brand.
Yeah, you should know those things throughout your own brand, because most people I'll sit down with like, how much does it cost? What's your gross margin?
Right.
And they're like, no idea. And I think that's why most people fail.
Absolutely.
Like they don't know the shipping cost or whatever. You got to know everything, otherwise you're not in the ball game. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say there have been times where I've sat down with friends like, oh, we're gonna do this, do that, and I'm like, okay, let me go to Excel, put the numbers together, and I'm like, okay, I think we could maybe sell 200 pieces. Okay, we made $500. It's not worth it.
They don't even think.
Exactly, because you can kind of map it out without actually having to spend any money. And that's really what's important, to figure out, like, are you doing this simply because you are bored or do you think it can actually make money? And there's a lane for that, but if you got $1,000 saved, this might not be the safest investment.
So what's like I'm a new kid getting out into the scene, trying to be a designer, creative director. A couple people, wise words or a piece of advice or thing you would recommend to start with.
I would say do your research, right? If you're not in school for this or you don't have the resources to do it, YouTube, Google, so important. Remember, knit versus woven. Don't say material, say fabric. Like that kind of thing. Like start there. And I would say just make sure that you're taking a moment to think outside of yourself. And it's hard. Like we get caught up. We want to do this. We want to do that. We want to make a statement. And there's a place for that. But just know that that path is a much longer path, to be at the top of the pyramid, as I like to say, whereas most of us kind of hover somewhere in the middle. And you can have a really great career and great life in that sort of midpoint, but just cover your bases, do your research, and be reflective. I think that's the biggest part. Identify that customer and know why you're doing this. Ask the factory why I can't do a print over the side seam. Why is it messy? Don't be afraid to ask the question and to challenge if you don't understand.
Great. Free education you just got. How much is FIT?
A lot of money.
$50K a year now.
Out of state.
Cool. Hope you learned.
I'm thinking I should speed it up to get away from all the media. I'm human, don't you think I had enough? My woman claiming that